If the last presentation was about microeconomics, I'm going to talk about macroeconomics. I'm not even really going to talk just about the consumer. What's bigger than the consumer in the world's largest consumer market for coffee? How about the whole coffee economy? Everything driven by the consumer. So this is really the most macro of macro research that we could do as an industry. Now, for those of you who suffered through economics in high school or college, we could do about 40 different slides on guns and butter, if you remember that kind of stuff, and supply graphs and demand graphs. But sometimes the research that you do is as important as the reason for doing the research. So I'm going to spend about 10 minutes talking about how we came to do this research. And to do that, I've got to go back to the beginning. Back 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, back 50 years. Rick Reinhardt and I, we were actually twins, and we were separated at birth. And the proof of that is that we both ended up doing very similar things, but by different paths. And we both ended up running national coffee associations. Now, Rick came to his position because he knows more about coffee than 99% of the people in the whole world. Rick knows more about coffee than I ever will, and there's no shame in me saying that. I mean, I really respect his knowledge. I came to do what I do differently. I took a different path. I became an association manager. And actually, I used to work in Hollywood years ago, which was pretty weird. You know, not in a good way. Anybody here from Portland, Austin? You know, you guys talk about keeping Portland weird. No one ever says that about Hollywood. No one ever says keep Hollywood weird. It's not a good weird at all. But there's another reason it was weird for me to work in Hollywood, because my name's Bill Murray. So I would have to pick up the telephone and call people about some of the issues that we had to address. And people were really hoping that when I said it was Bill Murray, that it was this guy. Okay? So every conversation I started with a disappointment. Are you the real Bill Murray? Well, no, I guess I'm not really the real Bill Murray. Are you the Bill Murray? No, I'm the other Bill Murray. Oh, okay, all right. Bill Murray's job is to entertain us. He's a funny guy. I'm not a funny guy. Okay, that's what Bill does. My job was to represent industry. And you might wonder, what sort of representation did the industry need? Funny thing is, we have a love-hate relationship with the movies as America. We love our movies, we love our TV, we love our cat videos. But there's some things that we're worried about and we hate. And we've always felt that there's way too much sex in movies. We've always felt that the portrayal of alcohol, drug use, smoking, bad words, why do they have to use that word? People want to know. That's created issues. People are even worried about the puppies, the Dalmatians. How are they treated on the set? And the industry itself had its own issues. Had a piracy problem, trying to keep kids away from certain things. Now, the piracy problem we had wasn't this kind of pirate. Hollywood made money off of these pirates, right? Peg legs and parrots and things like that. The piracy problem that Hollywood had was this one. People camcording movies and cinemas and taking them out to the rest of the world, breaking them out of the ecosystem, if you will. So it was our job to go off to Washington and try to deal with these issues. Now, I want to say at the outset, so I'm going to touch on Washington a little bit as I talk about this issue. It's really fashionable right now to bash Washington and the people there. I've never had that experience. I've tended to work with career civil servants in Washington. They're great people. They're hardworking people. They're really doing the best they can. They're under pressure. Their resources are strapped. So we go off to Washington to meet these people and try to talk about our issues, copyright issues, piracy issues. And it turns out most of the people in Washington aren't from Washington after all. They're from Vermont, or they're from Utah, they're from Iowa. And they'd all pretty much say the same thing. We're really not sure why the issues that are affecting a small group of people out in Hollywood should be of national concern. So we had to figure out a way to get our issues addressed. And the way we needed to do that was to connect the movie economy, the audiovisual economy, to the rest of the nation. So how do we do that? Well, it's true, right? If you think about in a very limited way, weird Hollywood, it's all about Hollywood. But if you go to the movies, you go to your local multiplex, your neighbor is working there. He's making a living doing that. There are TV stations in your local community. They're running ads. They're showing those movies. There's a cable operator. There's somebody selling popcorn. There's somebody selling soft drinks. There's a whole economy connecting Los Angeles, Southern California, to the rest of the country. Every time you hit the play button, you hit the play button on your laptop that you may have purchased from Best Buy down the street. You're connected to your ISP. This is all the piece. So you're probably wondering, what has any of this got to do with coffee? Any of this? Well, we too have issues in Washington. We have a regular roster of issues. For example, last year, the Food and Drug Administration took a look at the American diet, as they should. You might remember years ago, there was the food pyramid, the little triangle, that evolved into a circle, into the My Plate. Every couple of years, the FDA takes a fresh look at what Americans are eating, and they should. We have a national obesity epidemic. Type 2 diabetes is out of control in this country. A lot of it has to do with what we're eating. So the FDA makes recommendations. For the first time ever, they took a look at coffee as part of the diet. And we interacted with the FDA. We made submissions. And we said, look, we think the news on coffee is really, really good. There's spectacular science about coffee, about how good it is for you. And we hope you'll incorporate this into the recommendations. And that went pretty well, as you can see from the headlines. The FDA said, yes, coffee can be a healthy part of the American diet. Just think for a minute, though, what if that had gone in the opposite direction? What if our government was recommending that people don't drink coffee? That would have been a real problem for all of us. In fact, the intersection of regulation and law and litigation, it doesn't always come out as rationally as we'd like it to. How many of you have ever seen something like this? An iced beverage in a cup that says, warning, this cup is really hot, this is going to hurt you. Okay, this is an example of how litigation, law, regulation can go off the rails, unintended consequences. Right now, for example, one of the things that's being looked at in Washington, and not just in Washington, but around the globe, actually, is a question of caffeine consumption. Adina mentioned caffeine consumption a few moments ago. And very sadly, a couple of years ago, a couple of young men, they got their hands on pure powder caffeine. They overdosed, they died as a result of that. A real tragedy. That resulted in attention from politicians, from regulators. There's a perception that we're all more caffeinated than ever before. Probably not an accurate perception. There are more coffee shops. Coffee's more visible than ever before. But if you look at long-term consumption trends, there aren't drastic increases in the amount of caffeine we're ingesting. Could you imagine that at the end of the regulatory process, we all end up looking at something like this? A warning on your coffee cup. Now, most people, and we know this because we have research that tells us this, most people, if they saw that warning, they would say, I hope so, by God, I hope there's caffeine in my coffee. That's when people drink their coffee in their morning, it tails off over the course of the day. And people self-regulate. They know not to drink coffee after 5 o'clock at night. And as experts, as coffee experts, we all know the difficulty of the caffeine issue. That on the same coffee farm, the amount of caffeine being produced from one tree is different than another. That the preparation method, that the type of the coffee, everything is going to change the caffeine content. And how much is that going to help consumers? These are questions that would have to be asked and addressed as this issue proceeds. Why is something like this any more ludicrous an outcome than something like this? So we've been thinking about all these things, and in particular how we go to Washington and what we do and how we make our voice heard as an industry. Back to that macro question. Working with the good people in Washington whose job it is to protect us, to regulate business, and to make sure things work properly. So we decided that we would go out and for the first time ever, look at the coffee economy. We decided that we want to count the coffee economy to make sure the coffee economy counts. Now, if you've been in this business for any length of time, you know there's lots of numbers, lots of research, lots of statistics that are out there. But if you take a look at those statistics, they're actually kind of confusing. Is the coffee industry, is this a $36 billion business? Is it a $30 billion business? Is it a $13 billion business? Is it a $48 billion business? And what is meant by this? Some of these numbers have come from my own organization. So we decided to get together with a group of experts and undertake a project that took these numbers and eliminated the confusion and drew a much bigger picture about the coffee economy. We got together a bunch of research. We went out and looked at government statistics. We got some economists together, experts. We put them in a room, and we started to map out an approach to measure the coffee economy. First thing we did was to map it out, the core of the coffee economy, coffee. The major split here, as you can see, is really what we're going to call retail for the purpose of this presentation, coffee in a package on a shelf that you purchase and take home and make yourself, and food service, coffee where somebody else makes it for you. This is the core of the coffee economy. But of course, there's more to your coffee than just the coffee in your cup. There's the cup itself. There's the whitener, there's a sweetener, there are disposables. So there's an allied piece of the coffee economy as well. Same thing, same kind of branch as you look at the value chain or the supply chain. An important thing about this research is, especially because it's industry research, we wanted to be conservative. We wanted to do this right. So for example, we did not count a permanent wear. You all got a coffee cup, a ceramic coffee cup somewhere. Maybe there are pencils in your coffee cup. Maybe it's on a shelf somewhere. It says world's best coffee drinker. Maybe you potted petunias in your coffee cup. You have a t-shirt that says I'm a great coffee drinker. We didn't count any of that stuff. You would have bought a different t-shirt. This is really those things that relate directly to that cup of coffee. Next step in the process was to put numbers against this. Now this particular number, the value of domestic imports, this was something that we wrestled with. We spent literally a week as a group going back and forth over this number. You all know as coffee experts, the price of coffee, depending upon which market you're in, it changes by the minute, by the day, by the week, by the month, by the year. How do you get a number, an import number for domestic consumption? Well, we did two things. First of all, we ballparked it with our experts. But second, because we didn't want this study to be based on a ballpark number, we got an official US government statistic. When imports are made, there's a recordation of that import value. That goes into a trade database. And that's the basis for this number, which lined up with the values that our experts came up with when they looked at this. We then started to map out the rest of the value chain, looking at what happens to that coffee. We included coffee from Hawaii, we included solubles, extracts, again, the whole economy, to look for an overall value chain. This is the core piece of the coffee economy. But we talked a moment ago about the allied pieces of this. Now this is where it starts to get really tricky from an economic point of view. At one level, if you're purchasing whiteners to take home because you're making your coffee at home, you purchase those whiteners depending upon what they are, and that retail price reflects the value. But in other places in the supply chain, that's not so. If you go to a coffee shop, you're not being charged extra for whiteners. So we had to look at this, and the overall value, we believe, is not additive. You just can't go through here and add this up. You don't want to double count. You want to be conservative. It's the $6 billion at retail plus a couple of billion. But there's more to it. There's more to the coffee economy than just the coffee and the allied pieces. Remember, the question that we're asking is what happens if coffee disappears? Like, for instance, this room would be empty right now. We wouldn't be here, right? Our audiovisual guys who make this possible, thank you guys. You know, the AV ninjas dressed in black scattering back there. You guys make this happen. You're getting paid to be here. Now, the room might be full of Justin Bieber fans. There was a concert last night across the street, and their official fan club might be here, but we don't know that. What we do know is that the money we all spend on airplane tickets and Airbnb and hotel and all the rest of this, those things would not be happening. So what does that mean? It means that when you're looking at an economic analysis, you're looking at a couple of pieces. The direct piece, that core part of the value chain, and the allied pieces. The indirect piece. Think of the indirect piece as inter-industry exchanges. You pay an electrician to come to your coffee shop to hook up a machine for you. You pay a landscaper to shovel the snow in front of your coffee shop. And then there's the induced piece of this, What is induced? Induced essentially relates to household incomes. So what does that mean? It means you've got a small roaster. You got 10 people working for you. At the end of the week, they go home. They pay for daycare. They pay for doggy daycare. They pay their rent, and they take someone out to eat. They do things they wouldn't have otherwise done. This gets into things like the multiplier effect. So this is really complicated. The way we did this was we used a piece of software called Implan, I-M-P-L-A-N. This is really the gold standard of economic impact analysis. It was developed as a result of discussions in the late 1970s when the Forest Service was looking at land utilization. What happens if we take this piece of forest and we put up a paper mill here? What happens if we put up an office block here? There were lots of statistics, but no way to take those statistics and turn them into something that was useful for planning purposes. The software's been updated over and over and over again, and it's really quite sophisticated. So here's what we found in terms of the output. 1.6 million jobs, really 1.7 million when you round it off, jobs in this country are directly or indirectly attributable to coffee. That's a labor income, $68 billion in income resulting from those jobs, and total economic impact of $225 billion. This represents 1.3% of the total US economy. Now, I want to talk about that number just for a second. Normally, you'd say 1.3%, that's not very much. But when we talk about macroeconomics, as a politician would say these days, that's huge, okay? And the reason that's huge, if you think about the macroeconomic numbers that you hear, unemployment, it moves month to month, 0.1%. Overall gross domestic output, it moves a tick year to year. Accounting for 1.3% of the whole US economy, an economy this size really is enormous. But there's another piece as well, there's taxes. I presume we're all paying taxes. April 15th is just over the corner, right? If I were to ask you, how many taxes are you paying? You'd probably say too many. Well, you're paying nearly $28 billion in taxes that we're generating. You think about this at a time when local, state, and federal governments are all strapped for income. We have infrastructure issues, water system issues in Flint, poor people in Flint. Where are those monies going to come from? Coffee is a driver for government as well. This puts us on an overall level roughly comparable to the beer industry. Puts us at about half the size overall of poultry and chicken, and much larger bottled water, seafood, and baked goods. Overall, the picture looks like this: 1.7 million jobs, $68 billion in income, $28 billion in taxes, and $225 billion in total economic output for coffee as a sector here in the US. So this, I think, is one more demonstration of the power of coffee. We know that coffee has the power to get us up in the morning. It has the power to connect us to people across the table or halfway around the world. Coffee has the power to improve our health, whether it's our liver health, our cognitive abilities, even longevity. And now we know that coffee has the power to drive the US economy. And through that, make sure we have a place at the table when regulations, when government is talking about our sector and thinking about things that could impact our business. Before I walk off the stage, a couple of people I should say thanks to. A lot of energy went into making this happen. We had a lot of volunteers, people in our organization who donated their expertise, their time. They bought tickets, they came to New York, and they worked on this with us. Technomics, that was the consulting firm that did the heavy lifting on the research. They're a food and beverage consultancy out of the Chicago area. I can't recommend them more highly. Also, I want to thank SCAA. Rick participated. He really gave a lot of his time, his expertise, resources. And we also received a financial contribution from SCAA that certainly helped with this project. And of course, our own members. If you want to reach me, I'm the other Bill Murray. Remember that at WMMurray@ncausa.org. Thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.